Hi there, I'm Wendy and welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to show you how to crochet a plain coloured granny square, and I'm going to take you step by step through the first 3 rounds, and then when it comes to working the 4th round of your granny square, I'm going to show you how to change to a different colour, and I'm also going to show you how I join in a new ball of yarn if I run out part way round the round. I'm using UK weight acrylic double knitting yarn, and the yarn I'm using today is Stylecraft Special DK. I'm not sponsored by them, but it's just my go-to yarn that I tend to use regularly. I've got a 4mm hook, and I've also got a small pair of scissors at hand and a wool type darning needle. Now, if you want to use Aran weight wool, that's absolutely fine. You'll just want to have a 5mm hook. And if you're using UK chunky yarn, then you'll want to have a 6 or a 6.5mm hook. I'm also using UK stitch terminology, and we'll be working the UK treble stitch. But if you follow American stitch terminology, this is known as a USA double crochet stitch. So I know this gets a bit confusing, but don't worry, because you'll be following me every step of the way and I'll be showing you everything. So just before we start, if this is your first time here, please don't forget to subscribe and click that bell to get notifications of my latest videos. And it would also be great if you gave me a thumbs up or a like too. You'll also find me on Facebook, Instagram, Pinterest and Ravelry. So for now, we'll get going and start making this granny square. This is the left-handed video, so if you're right-handed, I'll put a link in above here now and in the description box below to take you to the right-handed video. Just to take a little look at what we're doing first, I'm going to start by creating a ring, and then in round 1 we're going to make the 4 sides of our granny square and also create the 4 corner spaces that you can see here. So the sides will consist of 3 stitches, and that's 3 UK treble stitches, and I can put my fingers through and you can see them in a row. And also I'm going to make 2 chains to create the corner spaces. So to make my slip knot, I've got my yarn laying across my fingers with the end of the yarn going to the outer edge of my little finger, and I'm going to hold that in place with my thumb, and then I'm going to take the long end of the yarn that's leading to my ball of wool. I'm going to take that across the top of my first 2 fingers and wrap it around underneath and form a cross, and then I'm going to hold that in place with my thumb. I'm then going to do the same thing again, but lower down. I'm going to wrap it around lower down over the top of my fingers underneath and hold that in place as well. So the top loop I made was the first loop and the bottom loop I made was the second loop. I can then take my finger underneath that top loop, grab the bottom loop and just gently pull that bottom loop through, and as I take it off my fingers, I just make sure that I hold these 2 ends of yarn and pull gently, and that has created the flexible loop, which is called a slip knot, that we need to pop onto our crochet hook. Now, if you know another way of making a slip knot, that's absolutely fine. There's loads of ways out there, but this is just the way that I use. So the next thing we want to do is to make our chain. Now basically the yarn is going to be coming up the back, over the top and down the front of the hook. So I'm going to pop my finger on top of this stitch, because if I don't do that, the stitch is going to spin. So I'm going to take the yarn up the back, over the top and down the front, and that is the yarn over movement or yarn over the hook. So I'm going to do it again. It goes up the back of the hook, over the top, down the front. So you can manually do this if you want to, or if you can create a little bit of tension between the yarn going from underneath your hook to your hand, you can take the hook in front of the yarn and underneath the yarn and behind the yarn, and it creates exactly the same movement. It creates that fundamental yarn over movement that we use in crochet. So I'm going to do that again. The yarn comes in front of the hook, underneath the hook and behind the hook, and it makes the same movement. So if you need any more help with making a chain, I'm going to add a link in above and in the description notes below to my tutorial video that will show you more slowly and in more detail. So I'm now going to create 5 chain and turn that into a ring. So I'm going to hold this little tail end that's underneath my crochet hook, and I've got my finger on top of the stitch to stop it from spinning, and I'm going to take my hook in front of that yarn, underneath it and up behind, and I've created the yarn over movement, and then turn my hook downwards and just gently pull on that little slip knot to open up that working space so I can just scoop my hook back through, and I've made 1 chain. So I'm going to do that again. I'm going to take my hook in front of the yarn, underneath the yarn and up behind. I can now hold that little chain that's underneath my hook, just gently pull it downwards very slightly and turn my hook downwards and scoop it through, and I've got 2 chains. So again, the hook goes in front of the yarn, underneath the yarn and up behind. And then I can scoop down and pull back through, and I have 3 chain. So again, the hook's going in front of the yarn, underneath and up behind, turn my hook downwards and scoop back through, and 1 more, the hook goes in front of the yarn, underneath the yarn and up behind, and then turn that hook downwards and scoop back through. Okay, so I'm not counting this little slip knot that I made at the beginning, that tiny little tight stitch, and I'm not counting the stitch that's on my hook, but I should have 5 V's looking at me, and this is the 5 chain. So I'm now going to turn that chain sideways and take my hook and pop it through the middle of the first chain that I made. And when I look at that, I've now got this U shape sitting on my hook. So I can make my yarn over movement again by taking my hook in front of the yarn, underneath and up behind. And then I'm now going to turn my hook downwards and scoop back through, and that's made a slip stitch which has connected our chain into a ring. So we've now got a circle. So now I've done that, I'm going to make 3 more chain. So that's 1, 2 and 3. So we're now going to make our first treble stitch, and I want to make sure that my yarn is at the back of my work and not at the front. So the yarn is going to the back of the work, and I'm going to make that yarn over movement just like when I made a chain. Now I'm going to take my hook through the middle of that ring that we made. Okay, so just through the middle of the ring, and then I'm going to make another yarn over. Now this time it will feel like it sort of flops in front of the hook, but that's fine. And when I've done that, I can pull the hook back through, and I've got 3 stitches on my hook. So that's the first half of the stitch made. Now I'm going to start decreasing. So I'm going to make the yarn over movement again, and I'm going to scoop back through the first 2 stitches. And I've got 2 stitches left on my hook. So now I'm going to make the yarn over movement again, and I'm going to scoop back through the last 2 stitches, and now I've made 1 treble. So I've got my 3 chain here and my 1 treble next to it. Now it might be worth holding this treble stitch with one hand and your ring with the other, and just pulling them apart gently, because sometimes you get a little bit of a gap between this 3 chain and the first stitch, and you might think that it looks wrong, but it isn't. It's absolutely fine. So we're going to make another treble. So we're going to make the yarn over the hook, make sure the yarn is at the back of our work, take the hook from front to back through the ring, then take the yarn over the hook again and pull back through to the front, and you'll have 3 stitches on your hook. Then it's yarn over the hook again, and then you draw back through the first 2 stitches, and you've got 2 stitches left on your hook, and then it's yarn over again and draw back to 1 stitch. And we've now made the first side of our square. Now we've got 3 chain here and 2 treble stitches. And whenever we start a round, we always make 3 chain to represent our first treble stitch. Okay, so for every round, the first group of trebles that you make are going to be starting with 3 chain and 2 trebles. So now I'm going to make a corner. So to make the corner, we simply make 2 chains. So that's 1, 2. And now I'm going to make 3 trebles all in a row. So I'm going to make sure that my yarn is at the back of my work. I'm going to make a yarn over, and then the hook goes from front to back through the ring. I then make a yarn over again, and I can pull that hook back through to the front, and I've got 3 stitches on my hook. Then I make a yarn over, and I can draw that hook back through the first 2 stitches, and I've got 2 stitches left on my hook. Then I make a yarn over again, and then I draw that hook back through, and I've got 1 stitch left on my hook. So that's 1 treble made. Now I'm going to make my second treble. So it's yarn over, hook through that ring, yarn over again, and pull the hook back through to the front. 3 stitches on my hook. Then I can make a yarn over and draw it back through the first 2 stitches, and I've got 2 stitches left on my hook. Yarn over again and draw it back through the last 2 stitches, and that's a second treble made. So again, I'm going to hold that treble stitch between my thumb and my forefinger, and I'm going to hold the ring and just open up that space a little bit to open up my working area in the ring. So now I'm going to make another treble. So it's yarn over, hook through the center of the ring, yarn over, and pull back through, and I've got 3 stitches on my hook. Then it's yarn over again and pull back through the first 2 stitches, yarn over again and pull back through the last 2 stitches. And now we've made the second side of our square, so we've got to make another corner. So we're going to make 2 chain, 1, 2, and we're going to make another set of 3 trebles. So it's yarn over the hook, hook through the hole, yarn over the hook, and draw back through to the front, and we've got 3 stitches on our hook. Yarn over the hook and draw back through the first 2, and there's 2 stitches left. Yarn over the hook and draw back through the last 2. So we're going to make our second treble, yarn over the hook, hook through the hole, yarn over the hook, draw back through to the front, and we've got 3 stitches on our hook, yarn over the hook, pull back through the first 2 stitches, yarn over the hook, and draw back through the last 2 stitches. So I can put my fingers between them, and I've got 1, 2 trebles, so I need to make 1 more. So it's yarn over the hook, hook through the center of the ring, yarn over the hook, pull back through to the front, and I've got 3 stitches on my hook, yarn over the hook and pull back through the first 2, yarn over the hook and pull back through the last 2, and I've made my third side. So we can see that our square is actually beginning to take place. So we now want to make our third corner. So I'm going to make 2 chains, and now we need to make our last 3 treble. So it's yarn over the hook, hook through the ring, yarn over the hook, pull back through to the front, yarn over the hook, pull back through the first 2, yarn over the hook and pull through the last 2 stitches. So we're going to make our second treble, yarn over the hook, hook through the ring, yarn over the hook and pull back through to 3 stitches on my hook, yarn over the hook, pull back to 2, yarn over the hook and pull back to 1. So we're going to make 1 more treble, yarn over the hook, hook through the ring, yarn over the hook, pull back through to the front, yarn over the hook, pull back through the first 2, yarn over the hook and pull back through the last 2 stitches. So now we just need to make our final corner before we can connect up our round. So I'm going to make 1, 2 chain, and then at the beginning of the round we made 3 chain to represent the first stitch. So I'm just going to count up 1, 2, 3, and I'm going to pop my hook through half of that third chain that we made, and then take my yarn over the hook and pull back through both stitches, and that's created a slip stitch, and that's connected our round. Now in all the future rounds we'll always be making 3 sets of treble apart from the very first set of treble at the beginning of the round. So whenever we start a round we're going to make 3 chain to represent the first stitch and then make 2 trebles. Apart from that, everything's going to be made in sets of 3 trebles, and these trebles are also known as granny clusters. So if I'm saying granny clusters or you hear granny clusters, it's always going to mean 3 trebles. But just remember, at the beginning of your round you always make 3 chain to stand up and represent that first stitch instead. So now to make round 2 we need to move our yarn to get across to being in the next corner space. So what I'm going to do is make a slip stitch in the top of the second treble here and in the top of the third treble, and then another slip stitch in the corner space to take that yarn across. So to do that I pop my hook through both sides of the V on top of the stitch, and then yarn over the hook and pull all the way through back to 1, and that was just the same way that we connected the round. And then I'm going to do that again in the third stitch. So I've gone through both sides of the V, yarn over the hook and pull back through all the way to 1, and then finally I'm going to make one last slip stitch in the corner space. So hook through that corner space, yarn over the hook, draw it all the way through, and we've now got our yarn in the perfect position to start round 2. Taking a look at round 1, you'll see that you've now got 4 sides and you've got 4 corner spaces as well. So in round 2 we're going to be working into these 4 corner spaces, and this is going to make the square look far more defined. So if I just lay this one on top here, you can see that in the peach square I've got 2 sets of granny clusters in each corner, and that's got a 2 chain space in between them. So I'm going to make my 3 chain to start. That's 1, 2, 3, and then I'm going to make 2 more trebles. That's my first and that's my second, and that's my first granny cluster made. Now I'm going to make 2 chain to create the corner space, and now I'm going to make another granny cluster in the same place. So I'm going to make 3 more trebles. So that's 1, 2 and 3. Okay, so I've got a nice corner here. Now I'm going along a straight edge. So whenever you're going along a straight edge, you just make 1 chain. So I'm going to make 1 chain, and I'm now going to jump to that next corner space, and I'm going to make 2 granny clusters, and I'm going to put 2 chain between them. So I'm going to make my first granny cluster. So this is my first treble, my second treble, and my third treble. I'm now going to make 2 chain, and that's 1 granny cluster complete. So I'm now going to make my second set of 3 trebles, my second granny cluster. So that's 1, 2 and 3. And I've now made 2 corners. So I've got my first corner here and my second corner here. So now I've got a straight edge again, and I'm going to jump across to that next corner. So as it's a straight edge, I'm going to make 1 chain, and now I can make my next set of 2 granny clusters with 2 chains between them in this corner space here. So that's 1 treble, 2 trebles and 3 trebles. Okay, so that's my first granny cluster made. Then I'm going to make my 2 chain space for the corner. And then I'm going to make my next granny cluster, so my next 3 trebles. So that's my second and my third. So again, I've got a straight edge to go along, so I'm going to make 1 chain. And now I'm going to jump to that third corner, and I'm going to again make 2 granny clusters with 2 chains between them. So that's 1, 2 and 3. So that's 1 granny cluster made. And then I'm going to make 2 chains for the corner. And then I'm going to make another granny cluster in the same place. So that's my first treble and my second treble and my third treble. So now I've finished that last corner, I've just got 1 straight edge to go along, so I'm going to make 1 chain, and then I can join to the top of the beginning of the round. So I made 3 chains at the beginning of the round to represent the first stitch, so I'm going to pop my hook through the top of the 3rd chain and make a slip stitch. And that's finished round 2. So again, I now need to get that yarn over into the corner so it's in the correct place to start round 3. So I'm going to make a slip stitch into the top of the 2nd and the 3rd treble and then into the corner space. So that's my first slip stitch into the 2nd treble, slip stitch into the 3rd treble, and slip stitch into the corner space. So now I'm ready to start round 3. So if you look at the 2 rounds of your work now, you'll see that in round 2 you were just working into the corner spaces, but you've actually created a chain space now going along the straight edges. So this blue square is one that I made earlier, and it consists of 3 rounds already. And you can see in the corner spaces you've got your 2 sets of granny clusters, and you've got a chain space in the corner with 2 chains there. But then along the straight edges now we're going to be making more granny clusters. So when you work along a straight edge, you just make 1 set of granny clusters and you have 1 chain either side of it. But then as soon as you get to a corner, you make 2 sets of granny clusters in the corner, and that turns your work, so that brings it around, and you make 2 chains to create your corner space. So we're going to start, as we have done before, making 3 chain, and that's going to represent that first stitch. So I've made my 3 chain. Now I'm going to make 2 more trebles, so that I've made 3 stitches in total for my first granny cluster. So there we go. I've got my 3 chains standing up and my 2 trebles. Now I'm going to make 2 chains to create my corner space. Now I'm going to make another granny cluster in this same space to turn the corner. So that's my first corner made. Now I've got a straight edge to go along, so I'm just going to make 1 chain, and I've got this gap, I've got this chain space here going along the middle of the straight edge, so I'm going to make 1 set of 3 trebles to make 1 granny cluster. So this is my second treble and my third. Okay, so now I'm going along a straight edge again to get to the corner, so I'm going to make 1 chain, and now I'm at my next corner space, so I'm going to make 2 granny clusters with 2 chain between them. So this is my first treble, my second treble, and my third treble, and that's 1 granny cluster complete. Now I'm going to make 2 chain to turn the corner. That's my corner space made, and I'm going to make another granny cluster in the same place. That's my second, and that's my third. So now I've got a straight edge again, so I'm going to make 1 chain, and I'm going to make 1 granny cluster in the gap going along the straight edge. So that's just 3 trebles. So that's 1, and that's my second treble, and my third. Now I've got a straight edge to go along again till I get to the next corner, so that's 1 chain, and in the next corner, like before, we're going to make 2 granny clusters with 2 chains between them. That's my first stitch, my second, and my third. So that's 1 granny cluster complete. Now 2 chain for my corner. Now I'm going to make my next granny cluster in the same place to turn the corner. That's my first, my second, and my third. So again, we've got this straight edge. So we're going to make 1 chain going along the straight edge, and then 1 granny cluster in this middle chain space. So that's my first treble and my second treble, and then my third treble. Okay, so again we're going along the straight edge to get to the corner, so it's going to be 1 chain, and then we've got this final corner space, so we're going to make 1 granny cluster, 2 chains, 1 granny cluster. So that's 1 treble, 2 trebles, and 3, and then my 2 chain to turn the corner. Now I'm going to make another granny cluster in this same space to turn the corner. 1 treble, 2 trebles, and 3 trebles. So we're going to make 1 chain as it's a straight edge and our final granny cluster in this chain space. So that's 1, 2 and 3 trebles, and then we can make our final 1 chain, and then I can join to the top of the beginning of the round. Now you've made 3 rounds of your plain granny square, it should be quite clear where your corner spaces are. So basically you just need to remember that when you're at the corner, you're going to make 2 granny clusters to turn the corner, and that very corner space has got 2 chains in it. Apart from that, you're going to be working 1 set of 3 trebles, 1 granny cluster going along each gap along the straight edge, and you always have 1 chain space either side. So what I'm going to do now is show you how to change colour in case you want to make a multicoloured granny square, and I'll also show you what I do when I run out of yarn and need to connect a new ball of yarn. If you want to change colour and make your next round in a new colour, then the way that I do it is I connect up my round as normal, just as you've just done, and then I cut my yarn so that it's about 10 centimetres long, or that's 4 inches. Then I make 1 last yarn over the hook and draw that hook back through and flick it off, and that secured the end for me, and then I can just darn that into the back of my work afterwards. Then I get my new colour and I tie it into a corner. Now I tend to use a different corner if I'm using this method, so I'm just going to go to the next corner and I'm just going to tie my yarn in, again leaving enough of a length to darn in afterwards, which will be that approximate 10 centimetres 4 inches, and let my yarn hang to the back, take my hook, pop the hook through that corner gap, yarn over the hook and pull it through, and now I'm ready to go using the new colour. So I'm going to make my 3 chain, 1, 2, 3, and then I'm just going to hold that chain and that corner space and then just part them slightly so that I'm just pushing that stitch back out the way, giving me a good space to work into. So I'm going to continue with this corner, and then I'm going to deliberately run out of yarn so I can show you what to do if you're part way round a round and you need to join in a new ball. So I'm just finishing off making this corner, and I'm going to start working along my straight edge. So this is my final treble. Okay, so I'm going to start making my next cluster, and oh dear, I'm suddenly running short of yarn. Now I like to change to a new ball of yarn between the 2nd and 3rd stitch if I can in a granny cluster. So I'm going to make 1 more, and I've only got about 10 centimetres left now, so I'm going to change colour between that 2nd and 3rd treble. So the way that I do it is I tie in my new colour fairly close to my work. Now there's lots of different ways of joining in new colours, but this is just the way I do it with a double knot, so that's held that in place. Then I just let the short ends fall out of the way so that I've got my working yarn again, and I start to make my last stitch. So I'm going to make my yarn over the hook and carry on, making sure that I don't catch those ends in. And I've made my 3rd treble, and when I turn it over, the join between the 2 balls of yarn is between the 2nd and the 3rd stitch in the cluster. So I can just leave that hanging there. I know it's secure. Then when I've got either a few rounds ahead or when I've finished my work, I can then just darn that in afterwards. So I really do hope that you've enjoyed making these granny squares, and don't forget, I'll pop a link in above and in the description notes below that will take you to my tutorial showing you how to crochet them together. So don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell, and then you'll hear when my latest videos come out. But for now, take care, happy crocheting, and look forward to seeing you soon. Bye!